This is Conversations with a Citizen. I am your host, Tia Carol Jones. I'm here today with Ahmadou Drame, Program Director at Illinois Justice Project. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Ahmadou Drame. I work at the Illinois Justice Project as a Program Director, as you just mentioned. But I was born in Chicago at, I guess, what is now the University of Chicago Hospital, but moved around a bit. Growing up, lived a bit in South Holland, lived in Woodlawn for a bit, lived in Uptown, and then eventually moved up to Evanston, where I did most of my formal education, but mostly educated locally. Spent some time community organizing, and now I spend most of my days, or most of my time, working to advance policies, programs, and initiatives that reduce gun violence, reduce violence in general, reduce incarceration, and as a result of reducing incarceration, also reduces the number of people who are returning back to communities from incarceration as well. And so I've been basically spending most of my adult career working towards that, and that's a little bit about me.
What is the Illinois Justice Project, and when was it founded?
Yeah, great question. So the work of the Illinois Justice Project started in 2014 as part of an initiative called Metropolis Strategies. The Illinois Justice Project today is a nonprofit organization that works to reduce violence, incarceration, reduce recidivism, or the number of people who are returning home to communities from the criminal legal system. And ultimately, we try to do that in a way that improves public safety. So that's our bread and butter, and we do that through policy advocacy. I like to tell people, and my friends at least, when they ask me what I do and what the Illinois Justice Project does, I don't know if you're familiar with the TV show Scandal,
Yes.
But I basically tell them that we're the Olivia Pope and Associates of Criminal Justice Reform. So
Okay.
we are the group of people who leaders, when they are faced with challenges, need advice, thought partnership in a discreet fashion, because we try to work low-key. We're the ones that they typically call first, and we try to help them solve those issues, and we try to do that in partnership and in deep relationship with them to help advance our mission as an organization.
Why is the work the Illinois Justice Project does so important when you talk about justice reform?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for asking that. I think over the last half century, communities have been told that the only way that we can improve public safety and the safety of our communities is through what I would refer to, and I think what are generally understood as tough on crime approaches. Over-policing of black and brown communities, the over-incarceration of black and brown men, and we've had 50 years plus to examine the effectiveness of that approach. And throughout that entire period, the irony is that crime has basically gone up, or has been relatively high throughout that period. And so I think we have ample evidence that there's something that isn't working in that approach. The work that we do is we try to advance our mission of improving public safety ultimately, and creating more equitable communities in mostly black and brown neighborhoods in the state of Illinois, throughout the state of Illinois, but in Chicago especially. We try to create public safety in ways that demonstrably work and have worked in other places. Ultimately, I think if we are to achieve public safety, we have to be willing to do a few things. The first is we have to take an honest look at the historical approaches that have not worked. I think secondly, we have to be willing, and I mean collectively, but I also include leaders in government who often are responsible for effectuating these things. We have to be willing to engage with community to both understand the dynamics and the problems that they're facing, but also, and I think this is often where we fall short in our public policy processes, we have to be willing to engage people in also generating the solutions. And we have to be willing to give a serious listen and try and to work with all energy and vigor to advance those solutions that the community wants to see. And then I think third, this is another thing that we tend to not do as good a job of, I think, in this country, is there has to be an ongoing discussion and dialogue with community about the approaches that we're changing, that we're taking, and the changes that we're bringing about. And I would emphasize honest and, to the extent possible, evidence-based. We are for instance, in the city of Chicago today, there are some, and I'm not going to get into naming individuals, but there are some who would have you believe that continuing with the tough on crime approach will work. There's a lot of misinformation and disinformation that is being circulated about a lot of initiatives, cash bail being one, and I hope we have a chance to talk about that later on. But the reality is, in other jurisdictions in this country, a lot of these smarter approaches, evidence-based approaches that happen to be grounded in principles like restorative justice, second chances, creating opportunities for people who are sometimes committing crimes that are associated with poverty, that they're actually more effective at creating safer communities and keeping people out of incarceration and keeping people out of the criminal legal system, and at the end of the day also saving taxpayers resources when the cost of government is ever increasing. So I think for all those reasons, the work is important.
Your work began, as you said, as a community organizer on the West Side. How did that work shape what you do now?
Yeah, thank you for that question too. I often when I talk to people, they often want to hear about like the policy work that I do, but that's a really good question that I appreciate. I think especially since, and I see this picture of Barack Obama on the wall. Ever since his story became more publicly known, community organizing has been put on the map. But for me, community organizing was the most important education that I had in my life. What I find most beautiful about community organizing is watching people who may or may not know each other but live in the same neighborhood come together and do things that they ordinarily wouldn't do and up until that point in their life hadn't done. Things like showing up to community meetings and talking to people who live in the neighborhood with them but who they've never had a conversation with, and engaging in the process that I think is ultimately the backbone of our democracy, of identifying the issues that they all have in common or have a common, a shared interest in seeing improved in the community, whether it be public safety or more economic development or better schools. And seeing people go through a process where they recognize the power that they have in numbers as people and not necessarily needing a ton of money to do so, that they can leverage the relationships they have to both build and exercise people power. I learned so much as a community organizer. I learned how to knock on doors and persuade people who had the slightest clue who I was and thought my name sounded funny, to show up to community meetings a week later, and to find those same people turning around and doing the same thing to recruit people to show up into the space, and then helping other people embark on their journey as citizens. I learned how to work with people. I learned how to persuade people. I learned how to have humility and to be humble in spaces. And I think these are all things, intangibles and skill sets that benefit people outside of the context and confines of community organizing. They're things that I use to this day. In policy work, in the work that we do, we have to collaborate with people from a variety of backgrounds, various disciplines, different sectors, and all of those skill sets that I learned in community organizing help contribute to this work. I'm also, as I think you know, was recently selected to join a small group, or I guess a relatively large group, but in the global sense, a small group, 50 people, or 50-ish people, who are going to be Leadership Greater Chicago Fellows. I was actually looking at the photo just outside of this door, and I saw that Alderwoman Pat Dowell was in a picture with a group of people after a street naming ceremony. She's also an alumnus of the program. Michelle Obama also went through the program, and my hope is that those same skill sets that I learned in community organizing can help me succeed in this program, which really brings together Leadership Greater Chicago, which brings together leaders from a variety of sectors, whether it be for-profit sector, people working in business, people working in government, people working in not-for-profit space like me, together so we can embark on our leadership journey and begin forging relationships with one another. So it's been incredibly important to me and for my career and for the work that I do, and I hope that it continues to do so.
In 2020, Illinois Justice Project hosted Justice 2020, the demand for equity. What came out of that convening, and which ideas have been implemented in the years since?
Thank you for that question also. Justice 2020, as you mentioned, started out as a convening with a number of leaders. We had the mayor, Senator Dick Durbin, Attorney General Kwame Raoul, and others who participated in this event that was co-convened by the Illinois Justice Project and other community-based organizations, Green and Green Legal Aid, business and professional people for the public interest, and others, to begin to develop a common agenda around criminal legal system reform and really trying to offer an alternative to what exists out there as a narrative for how we can achieve public safety. The criminal justice advocacy community in Illinois is a strong one, but it hasn't always been centered around a common agenda or a common set of agenda items that we wanted to see. And this was the beginning of us really taking a serious attempt to bring together the various elements of our advocacy community in order to do so. The work has evolved since. Today, Justice 2020 exists as a statewide initiative. There are lots of people who are involved in that process. We even have a website, Justice 2020, the number 2020.org. And we have, our work is now organized into 4 pillars. We're focusing on policing. We're focusing on the pretrial justice system in the courts. We're focusing on ways to improve also the conditions for people who are incarcerated through programming, et cetera, and also reentry outcomes for people who are exiting. And then we're also committed to zeroing in on how we can create safe and thriving communities, the types of supports that prevent people from entering the criminal legal system altogether, and reduces and ultimately our mission to eliminate the need for that to be a tool to create public safety in our communities. So that work is evolving. There are lots of ways for people to get involved, and I would encourage people to go to justice2020.org to learn more about it.
The SAFETY Act was signed into law in 2021, and part of that law eliminates cash bail beginning January 1st, 2023. How does eliminating cash bail fit into the mission of the Illinois Justice Project?
Yeah, thank you for that question as well. So if I'll take a step back here and just provide some context about cash bail, because on this issue in particular, there's a lot of disinformation out there. When cash bail was introduced to the criminal legal system as a concept and as a practice, it was done under the belief, mistaken belief, as research has told us today, but the belief nonetheless, that if during the pretrial process, when a person has been accused of a crime and not yet convicted, that in order to get a person back to court so that they would sit through the actual trial process and the court process to reach a judgment or a conviction or not, that it was necessary for people to pay money for effectively their pretrial and pre-adjudication decision to be free. Since then, there has been a lot of research that has demonstrated that money is not a determining factor in deciding whether a person returns to court or not, and whether they show up to court or not. The mere fact and the potential of being imprisoned, of being sent back to jail, is more than sufficient to get a person to show back up to jail, or excuse me, to court. And so what the Pretrial Fairness Act does is it eliminates the use of wealth in determining whether a person is to be free and out of jail or not, while they have merely been accused of a crime but not yet convicted. Ultimately, with mass incarceration and the impact that it has had on our communities, and by our communities I mean Black and brown communities in particular, the people who bear the brunt of paying for that are mostly Black women. You have a lot of mostly young Black men who are entering the jail and prison system and being policed. And it's often mothers, partners, whether it be a spouse, a girlfriend, or, a significant other, aunts, grandmothers, who are paying for that bail. And it has extracted wealth also from our communities in the process. So it aligns completely with our mission as an organization. We are about creating more equitable communities, and it does accomplish that. We're also about creating a more just and equitable criminal legal system, and we ought not be using wealth as a determining factor as to whether or not people will have justice. A lot of times people sit and languish in jail for crimes that amount to $300 worth of an offense, and it costs over $50,000 to incarcerate a person just for a year. Every time a person returns back to prison, it actually costs taxpayers $150,000 in the state of Illinois. I don't think that the remedy of incarcerating a person for an offense that is $300 worth of damages, obviously it's very serious and it needs to be dealt with, but should we be imprisoning people for that long, or should we have people languishing in jail for that long for a crime that amounts literally quantifiably to that dollar amount? I don't think that that's the right remedy, and I think that our organization is trying to, with the Pretrial Fairness Act, which is a component of the Safety Act, and other initiatives, we're trying to advance an agenda that creates a more equitable criminal legal system, and I think that the state and our city will be much better off when we have a process that really just evaluates a person based upon the crime they've been accused of, the circumstances surrounding that crime, in determining whether or not they are a risk to public safety or not. And it literally is that simple. That's what it does.
What other justice reform legislation is Illinois Justice Project looking at closely, and what justice reform legislation do you think should be introduced?
We are very focused on implementation of the Safety Act and the Pretrial Fairness Act. It has garnered a lot of attention. Historically, in other places, what has happened sometimes when these types of initiatives have been advanced is, predictably, there are those who have a vested interest in the system as it is, who are reluctant to allow changes to move forward. And so we are very focused on implementation. That is a big part of what we do, is make sure that the laws that we got passed are actually implemented. So there's a lot of work going on with work groups, and we're connecting with the courts and Attorney General's office and various states attorneys throughout the entire state of Illinois to help prepare people for January 1 of next year, which is when this is going to go into effect. We're also very focused on supporting individuals who have been incarcerated and helping them successfully reenter communities. So I don't know if your listeners know this, but we have in the state of Illinois more than 4.1 million people who have an arrest or conviction record. The population of Illinois is a little over 12 million. We have over 4 million people, working age adults, with an arrest or conviction record. It amounts to basically 41% of the working age population in the state. And these individuals may be eligible for expungement of their records, but not all are. But there are a number of laws, policies on the books that make it virtually impossible for a person after they've been incarcerated to successfully reenter society. And so we're very focused on supporting our partners and supporting work that eliminates barriers and creates opportunities for people who have been incarcerated to successfully reintegrate back into society and to rebuild their lives. We're very focused on housing. Some years ago, I was involved in a coalition called the Just Housing Coalition that passed the Cook County Just Housing Ordinance, which made it much more difficult to discriminate against people based on them having an arrest or conviction record. We're focused on creating housing, literally developing more housing, affordable housing as well. One of the things that we find is that some landlords, housing providers, are a bit hesitant to provide housing for people who are incarcerated, and there's research that shows that when people who are formerly incarcerated have a stable place to live, a safe place to call home, that they are more likely to successfully reintegrate into society, to get a job, to become employed, to engage in other pro-social behaviors, and to stay out of the criminal legal system as well. And so we're very focused on that right now. There's a lot of work that's been happening on that front. The Chicago Mayor's Office recently created a new director of reentry position in the Mayor's Office, along with significant funding to support services and programs throughout the city. The state of Illinois has been increasingly investing in resources to make it possible for people to have a safe place to live throughout the state, and we're going to continue focusing on those things as well.
Where can people go to find out more about Illinois Justice Project?
Yeah, I would encourage people to go to our website. The Illinois Justice Project website is iljp.org, and to Justice 2020, the number 2020, as well, to learn about the organization, but also the work that we do.
Before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like our audience to know?
Well, I just want to say thank you for having me. I know that it isn't everyone who gets invited to this space and has an opportunity to sit down and have a discussion with you. And I hope at some point in the future we can come back and have another discussion about some of the work that we're doing and as it continues.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Remember to make plans to join us again next week for Conversations with the Citizen, the place where real news can be heard.